This is a snippet from a voter file, something you are going to get extremely familiar with in this class, extremely familiar with in this program, and if you decide to run for political office, extremely familiar with when you run for political office. But what the voter file is, and we're going to have a video that just talks about the voter file. Every state has lists of registered voters, which is the voter file. Different states you may be able to or have to register as a party, other states not. But what candidates, campaigns, parties do is look at the voter file where they can see people's voting history. In many states, in most states, they can see which party the person's registered in, and that becomes their basis for understanding what percent of the electorate falls into each of those 9 bins. Because from the voter file, you can calculate, and I'll tell you more about this and teach you how to do this, you can calculate someone's probability of voting and someone's probability of voting for a Democrat or someone's probability of voting for a Republican. Here are aggregated numbers coming from a voter file. So this comes from the state of Florida. So you see in Florida there is probably about 11 million registered voters. Of those 11 million registered voters, 4.1 million are frequent voters who will vote in just about every midterm and presidential election. You then have 3.3 million voters 3.3 million registered voters who tend to only vote in presidential elections. You then sort of have this odd group, not sure I want to make much of it here, of voters who only vote in midterms. And then you have over 3 million infrequent voters. And you see the difference in the partisan predispositions of each of those sorts of voters. What's a Republican advantage? Well, in Florida, frequent voters, those people who can be counted on to turn up in just about every election, Republicans have a 4 percentage point advantage among frequent voters. Whereas when you expand the electorate to those extra 3.3 million who tend to only vote in presidential elections, Democrats have about a 6 percentage point advantage. Don't forget that table. That's going to come back soon, and that's going to be one of your first assignments. So imagine that we were looking at the 2016 election in summer of 2016. The first question that we would answer, remember what I said, analyzing elections, winning elections, polling elections correctly is about understanding the letters. What are the first letters we want to understand? It's that X, Y, and Z. We want to understand what the composition of the electorate is going to be. And what would we have thought was going to be the composition of the electorate? So one major demographic factor that's happening in this country is becoming much less white overall. Now, there's some variance in different states in that demographic trend, but from 2004 to 2012 was only 8 years. The country went from having about 76% of the eligible voters in the country being white to November of 2012 to only about 71% of the eligible electorate being white. We also saw a change in turnout rates. Traditionally, white voters turned out at higher rates. So not only were there more white voters, but white voters turned out at higher rates. We saw in 2008 and 2012 an increase in black turnout. Now, as we're going to talk about, this was a lot of a mistake that the Clinton people made in assuming that black turnout would be the same in 2016 as it was in 2008 and 2012. But when you take a decreasing number of whites, an increasing number of non-whites, and increased turnout among black voters, you got an electorate that was becoming much less white and much more non-white. So, whereas the electorate was 79% white in 2004 when George W. Bush won re-election, the electorate was only 74% white in 2012 when Barack Obama won re-election. Why is that important? Well, white voters are much more likely to vote Republican. Non-white voters are much more likely to vote Democrat. White voters much more likely to identify as Republicans. Non-white voters much more likely to identify as Democrats. So going into 2016, there was a lot of folks talking about the changing face of the American electorate and this demographic destiny that Democrats had because the electorate was aging, more Republicans were dying, more Democrats were coming in to the electorate was becoming less white, more non-white, and therefore becoming less likely to be predisposed to be Republican, more likely to be predisposed for Democrats. So the changing face of the American electorate, these demographic factors were suggesting that the composition of the electorate should benefit the Democrats. And lots of the pre-election polling seemed to confirm that notion. So this actually is a chart that I did for Bloomberg Politics, and there's lots of sites out there that aggregate polling results on the horse race question, or the Trump versus Clinton, the Obama versus Romney, or the Obama versus McCain. But what I did is I aggregated the composition of the electorate from each poll and listed the partisan composition from each poll. And what you see here, overall, if you look at a bunch of pre-election polls from The Economist, YouGov, Bloomberg, Fox, Monmouth, Morning Consult, NBC Wall Street Journal, McClatchy Marist, NBC Survey Monkey, that all of those polls had about a 6 percentage point advantage for Democrats. On average, 38% of the electorate in this pre-election polls was Democratic and 32% Republican. And if you remember, what the exit polls showed was that it was 38 to 32 in 2012. So before the 2016 election, it looked like the letters on composition were the same letters that they were in 2012. What ended up happening? Well, Democrats did end up having an advantage in the composition of the electorate in 2016, but it was less than it was in 2012 and 2008. This shows the racial or ethnic composition of the electorate using census data, which is slightly different than the exit poll, but the pattern, the trends are exactly the same. So as where data from the census might show that the electorate was a little bit more white than the exit polls, the trend is exactly the same, and the downward trend in white voters is exactly the same. But whereas we've seen a couple percentage point drop, so in 2000 the electorate was 81% white, and then in 2004 it was 79% white, and then it dropped 3 percentage points in 2008, and then it dropped another 2.5 percentage points in 2012. In 2016, it basically steadied at 74% of the electorate being white. And the reason for that, and as you look in retrospect, it seems pretty obvious. Black turnout was down in 2016. Number of black voters, or potential black voters, stayed the same, may even have gone up a little bit, but with Barack Obama not at the top of the ticket, black turnout was less than it was in 2008 and 2012. We're going to talk about a bunch of mistakes that the Clinton campaign made, but one of the big mistakes they probably made in their modeling, in their estimation of what share would be that black turnout in 2016 would be the same as it was in 2008 and 2012. So remember what we're trying to do. If it's summer of 2016 and we're trying to analyze and figure out what was going to happen, we're trying to figure out what share is going to be, and we're trying to figure out what performance was gonna be. And if we're trying to analyze what happened afterwards, we're trying to understand what the interplay of share and performance was. So we filled in the X, Y, and Z here. We filled in what the share of the electorate looks like. But of course, share and performance determine vote share. It's not just share, it's not just performance.